The dining room stayed unchanged all these years. Same polished oak table, same antique chairs, same flowery scent from Mom's favorite candles. Dad sat at his usual spot, carving the turkey with military precision. Mom passed around her famous cranberry sauce. For a moment, it felt like nothing had changed since I was 12. Then Dad looked up, glass raised, and announced, to Emma, the successful daughter who makes us proud every day. He didn't even glance my way. My sister smiled, accepting the praise as her birthright. That's when my phone rang. The screen lit up with General Martinez calling. Dad froze mid-toast. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fork trembled in my hand as I excused myself from the table. My heart raced with each step toward the hallway. Behind me, I heard Dad's confused voice, who would be calling her during dinner. I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Lieutenant Maya Chen reporting, sir, I answered, my voice suddenly steady and professional. The general's deep voice filled my ear with news I'd waited months to hear. The mission was greenlit. My specialized tactical unit would deploy next month. I had been selected to lead. When I returned to the table, the atmosphere had shifted. Everyone stared at me expectantly. Mom's eyebrows raised in question. Emma looked genuinely curious. But Dad's expression remained skeptical, as if any achievement of mine must be minor compared to Emma's corporate success. That was General Martinez, I said simply, picking up my water glass. My unit deploys next month. I've been promoted to lead the operation. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crack the china. Dad's fork clattered against his plate. General Martinez? The head of Special Operations Command? Why would he be calling you personally? The question stung more than it should have. 6 years in Special Forces, 3 high-risk deployments, and countless missions that would never make official reports, yet Dad still couldn't imagine why a general might call me. Because I've spent the last 2 years developing a tactical approach that's being implemented across multiple theaters, I said evenly. The general has been my direct supervisor on the project. Emma's eyes widened. Mom looked between Dad and me, her hands nervously adjusting her napkin. Dad's face remained frozen somewhere between disbelief and confusion. I thought you were just. Emma said you were struggling to find direction after college, Dad stammered. I turned toward my sister. Emma at least had the decency to look embarrassed. I never said that exactly, she murmured. You told them I was struggling? The betrayal felt fresh and sharp. Emma shrugged, uncomfortable but not apologetic. You never talk about your work. You assumed I was failing, I finished for her. The words tasted bitter. Dad cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the conversation. Well, this is certainly unexpected news. But Emma's accomplishments are still impressive. Senior Marketing Director at 32, company car, corner office. I know, Dad, I interrupted. We've heard about Emma's corner office at every family dinner for the past 3 years. Mom gasped softly. This wasn't how Chen family dinners worked. We didn't interrupt. We didn't challenge. We certainly didn't point out the blatant favoritism that had shaped our family dynamic since childhood. Maya, Mom warned, her tone carrying years of practiced mediation. But something had broken loose inside me. Maybe it was the general's call validating years of invisible work. Maybe it was the weight of constantly being measured against Emma and found wanting. Whatever the cause, I couldn't stop the words that tumbled out next. Do you even know what I do? I asked Dad directly. Have you ever actually asked? Dad shifted uncomfortably. You're in the military. Some kind of technology position. I laughed, though nothing felt funny. Technology position. That's what you've decided to call it. Well, you never talk about it, he defended. Emma always shares her achievements. Because Emma's achievements are allowed at this table, I replied. Mine never fit your definition of success. The dining room fell silent again. Outside, a car passed by, headlights briefly illuminating our frozen tableau through the curtains. Mom stared at her plate. Emma twirled her wine glass stem between manicured fingers. Dad looked genuinely perplexed, as if I'd spoken in a language he couldn't comprehend. That's not true, he finally said. We've always supported both our daughters. Equally. The statement was so absurd I almost choked. Equally? Dad, you paid for Emma's MBA at Stanford. When I asked for help with my first apartment deposit after basic training, you said I needed to learn financial independence. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His face flushed. That was different. Emma's education was an investment in her future. And mine wasn't? The question hung in the air between us. Mom reached for the serving spoon, desperate to restore normalcy. Who wants more mashed potatoes? But the facade had cracked. Years of unspoken resentment leaked through, impossible to patch with comfort food and practiced smiles. I should go, I said, placing my napkin beside my barely touched plate. I have preparations to make before deployment. Dad frowned. You're leaving? But we haven't had dessert. The simple statement somehow captured everything wrong with our family, the emphasis on maintaining appearances, the refusal to acknowledge uncomfortable truths, the expectation that I would just fall in line. I've lost my appetite, I replied, standing up. Thank you for dinner, Mom. As I collected my jacket from the hall closet, I heard hushed voices from the dining room. Emma's defensive tone. Mom's placating murmurs. Dad's confused questions. The familiar soundtrack of my family processing my existence. I stepped outside into the cool November air, breathing deeply to clear my head. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Captain Ramirez checking if I'd heard from the general. Reality rushing back in. The mission. The responsibility. The trust placed in me by people who actually saw my value. Standing on my parents' porch, I felt the strange disconnect between my two worlds. Inside that house, I was the disappointing daughter, the lesser sister, the family member whose achievements required qualifiers and explanations. Outside, I led elite soldiers into situations that demanded split-second decision-making and absolute trust. For years, I'd tried to bridge those worlds, to translate my accomplishments into terms my family might recognize and appreciate. Tonight had proven the futility of that effort. Dad would always see Emma as the successful one. My path would always confuse him, no matter how far I climbed. I was halfway to my car when the front door opened. Emma stood in the doorway, her silhouette backlit by the warm glow of the dining room. Maya, wait, she called, hurrying down the steps. She hadn't bothered with a coat, and her designer dress offered little protection against the evening chill. I turned, keys in hand. What? Is it, Emma? She stopped a few feet away, arms crossed against the cold. That wasn't fair, what happened in there? Which part? I asked. All of it, she admitted. The toast. Dad's reaction to your call. The way they dismiss what you do. I shrugged. It's nothing new. I know, she said quietly. That's the problem. We stood in silence for a moment, our breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Growing up, Emma and I had been close despite our different personalities and interests. Somewhere along the way, perhaps when Dad started clearly favoring her path over mine, we'd grown distant. She became the standard against which I was measured and found lacking. I became the sister whose choices she couldn't understand. I never told them you were struggling, Emma finally said. I just didn't correct them when they assumed it. The distinction felt meaningless. Same result. She nodded, acknowledging the truth of that. I'm sorry, Maya. I should have said something. Why didn't you? I asked, genuinely curious. Emma looked away, embarrassed. It was easier. When they focused on my successes, it meant they weren't scrutinizing my failures. That surprised me. What failures? You're the golden child. She laughed without humor. Golden children aren't allowed to fail. Do you know how exhausting that is? My divorce last year? Dad still introduces Richard as my husband at his golf club because he can't bear telling people I couldn't make my marriage work. I hadn't known that. Despite our monthly phone calls, there were vast territories of each other's lives we never explored. I'm sorry about Richard, I said. You deserved better. Emma smiled faintly. So did you. Better recognition, I mean. From all of us. A car turned onto our street, its headlights sweeping across us before continuing past. In that brief illumination, I saw something in Emma's expression I hadn't noticed in years, the openness we'd shared as girls, before. Competition and comparison built walls between us. This mission, Emma said hesitantly. Is it dangerous? I considered lying, then decided against it. Yes. She nodded, processing this. Will you tell me about it when you can? I'd like to understand what you do. The offer was unexpected. Most of it's classified. Tell me what isn't, then, she persisted. I want to know my sister's life. Something tight in my chest loosened slightly. I'd like that. Emma glanced back at the house, then lowered her voice. I've put together a family group chat to keep everyone updated while you're deployed. Is that okay? The thought of my parents receiving regular updates about my work felt both terrifying and overdue. They won't suddenly start understanding just because you tell them things. Maybe not, Emma agreed. But they can't understand if no one ever tries to explain. She had a point. My strategy of silence and distance hadn't improved anything. Okay, I conceded. But don't expect miracles. I don't, Emma said. Just small steps. We stood awkwardly for a moment, neither sure how to end the conversation. Finally, Emma closed the distance between us and hugged me quickly. Be safe. Out there, she whispered. And come home. The simple request held more genuine concern than I'd felt from my family in years. I hugged her back, surprised by the sudden thickness in my throat. I will. As I drove away, I watched Emma in my rearview mirror, standing in our parents' driveway until I turned the corner. The evening hadn't gone as planned. The recognition I'd secretly hoped for hadn't materialized. Dad still saw me through the distorted lens of his expectations. But something had shifted between Emma and me. A small crack in the facade, a glimmer of the connection we'd once shared. I thought about the mission ahead, the team relying on me, the months of preparation finally coming to fruition. General Martinez had called me personally because he valued my judgment and trusted my abilities. In that world, I wasn't defined by being Emma's sister or my parents' disappointment. I was defined by my actions, my decisions, my leadership. Maybe that would have to be enough. My apartment felt empty when I returned, the silence a stark contrast to the emotional chaos of my parents' house. I dropped my keys on the counter and checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Captain Ramirez, a text from Lieutenant Diaz about equipment requisitions, and an email from General Martinez with mission parameters. This was my real life, the one my family couldn't or wouldn't see. I sat down at my desk and began reviewing the mission details, pushing thoughts of dinner and family expectations to the back of my mind. Here, at least, my value was clear and unquestioned. The next morning, I woke to a text from Emma. I told them about your bronze star. Dad wants to know when you got it and why. Progress? I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. The medal had come after an operation in eastern Afghanistan 2 years ago. The official citation mentioned exceptional courage under fire, but omitted the 19-hour firefight, the 3 wounded teammates I'd carried to safety, the makeshift medical procedures performed while waiting for extraction. How could I explain that to parents who thought I had a technology position? Before I could decide, another text came through. Don't overthink it. Just basic facts. Small steps, remember? I smiled despite myself. Emma knew me better than I'd given her credit for. June 2023, I texted back. Operation in Afghanistan. Extraction under enemy fire. 3 dots appeared immediately, then, thank you. I'll handle it from here. Focus on your prep. It felt strange, trusting Emma to translate my life to our parents. For years, I'd kept my military accomplishments separate from my family life, tired of seeing my achievements diminished or misunderstood. Now I was deliberately opening that door, allowing Emma to be the bridge I'd never managed to build myself. Over the next 3 weeks, as deployment preparations intensified, Emma sent regular updates. Dad had looked up the Bronze Star citation online. Mom wanted to know if they could send care packages to my unit. Dad had mentioned my promotion to his colleagues at work. Small steps indeed. The night before deployment, I found myself back at my parents' house. Not for dinner this time, but because Emma had insisted on a proper send-off. Just coffee and dessert, she'd promised. 1 hour, tops. Let them try, Maya. The living room felt different somehow. Photos I'd never noticed before were displayed prominently on the mantel, me in uniform at graduation from officer candidate school, receiving my first lieutenant bars, standing with my unit after returning from my second deployment. Mom hugged me longer than usual when I arrived. Dad stood awkwardly nearby, hands in his pockets, clearly unsure of the protocol for sending a daughter into danger. We made coffee, Mom said, gesturing toward the kitchen. And Emma brought cheesecake from that place you like downtown. The careful consideration felt unfamiliar. My previous deployments had been marked by tense phone calls and my mother's thinly veiled disapproval of my career choice. In the kitchen, Emma was arranging dessert plates with uncharacteristic attention to detail. She looked up when I entered, her expression a mix of determination and nervous energy. "Too much?" she asked quietly. I shook my head. "Just different." Dad cleared his throat behind us. "Maya, I was hoping we might talk before you leave." Emma shot me an encouraging look before tactfully announcing she needed to help Mom find the good napkins. The kitchen suddenly felt very small with just Dad and me. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, eyes fixed somewhere past my shoulder. "Emma's been telling us about your work. The medal. The promotions. This special unit you're leading." I nodded, unsure where this was heading. "I didn't know," he continued, "about any of it, really." The admission seemed to cost him something. My father had always been the family authority, the one who knew everything worth knowing. Acknowledging his ignorance about my life couldn't have been easy. "You never asked," I said simply. He winced but didn't deny it. "I didn't understand your choices. The military seemed so random. After all the opportunities you had." The old frustration flickered. "It wasn't random to me. I see that now," he said, surprising me. "Emma showed us some articles about your tactical developments. Over my head, most of it, but impressive. Very impressive." The compliment felt strange coming from him, too little, too late, yet somehow still meaningful. "When that general called during dinner," Dad continued, "I thought it must be some minor administrative thing. I couldn't imagine." He trailed off, looking troubled. "That I might actually be good at what I do?" I finished for him. Dad had the grace to look ashamed. "That you might be exceptional at it." The word hung between us. Exceptional. Not just successful or competent, but exceptional. It was the word he'd always reserved for Emma's achievements. "I've been unfair to you," he admitted. "Comparing you to your sister, measuring you against a standard that had nothing to do with your actual work." I leaned against the counter, suddenly exhausted. How many years had I waited for this acknowledgement? How many achievements had I downplayed or hidden completely because I knew they wouldn't register on his narrow scale of success? "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Dad looked directly at me for perhaps the first time that evening. "Because Emma made me realize I might not get another chance. This mission you're going on, she says it's dangerous." The honesty of that answer caught me off guard. Behind my father's rigid expectations and perpetual disappointment, there had always been love, imperfect, conditional at times, but real. The thought that he might lose me before resolving our differences had finally cut through his pride. "It's my job, Dad," I said gently. "I'm good at it. I've trained for it. My team trusts me." He nodded, blinking rapidly. "I should have trusted you too. With your choices. Your path." It wasn't quite an apology, but from my father, it was monumental. A crack in the armor of certainty he'd worn my entire life. "Thank you," I said, meaning it. Mom and Emma returned then, carrying napkins neither of us believed they'd actually been looking for. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, my favorite foods to receive in care packages, Emma's new project at work, Mom's book club selections. But something had changed. Dad listened when I explained the general parameters of my mission. He asked questions that showed genuine interest rather than skepticism. When I mentioned Lieutenant Diaz's exceptional marksmanship, he didn't immediately counter with a story about Emma's latest client acquisition. Small steps. As the evening drew to a close, I found myself actually reluctant to leave. These tentative connections felt precious and fragile, like the first green shoots after a long winter. At the door, Mom hugged me fiercely, pressing a small package into my hands. "For the journey," she whispered. "Open it when you're alone." Dad stepped forward next, his movements stiff with emotion he'd never learned to express comfortably. Instead of our usual awkward handshake, he pulled me into a brief, tight hug. "Come back to us," he said gruffly. "That's an order, Lieutenant." The use of my rank, acknowledging my identity beyond just being his daughter, wasn't lost on me. "Yes, sir," I replied, feeling the ghost of a smile. Emma walked me to my car, the night air cool around us. "Not exactly how I planned this evening," she admitted. Dad went off script. I raised an eyebrow. "You had a script?" She laughed. "More like talking points. Acknowledge Maya's accomplishments. Express pride. Avoid comparisons." The basics. The idea of my sister coaching our parents on how to interact with me should have been sad, but instead, I found it touching. Emma had taken on the role of family translator, using her position as the favored daughter to create space for me. "Thank you," I said, meaning it. "For trying." Emma shrugged, trying to look casual though her eyes were suspiciously bright. "Long overdue. And completely self-serving. Who else will intimidate my future boyfriends if something happens to my badass sister?" The joke was her way of acknowledging the danger without dwelling on it. I appreciated that more than she knew. "I'll be back to terrify them in 6 months," I promised. We hugged briefly, then I got into my car. As I pulled away from the curb, I saw all 3 of them standing in the doorway, Mom leaning against Dad, Emma slightly apart but definitely part of the unit. My family. Imperfect, complicated, but mine. At a stoplight, I opened Mom's package. Inside was a small compass, old-fashioned and clearly antique. A note in my mother's neat handwriting. "Read, this belonged to your grandfather. He carried it through 2 wars and came home both times. May it guide you safely back to us." I closed my fingers around the compass, feeling its weight and history. The light turned green, and I continued toward base, toward my team, toward the mission awaiting me. Behind me, a family slowly learning to see me. Ahead, a world where I had already proven my worth. For the first time, those worlds didn't feel quite so separate. The barracks buzzed with pre-deployment energy. Soldiers checking gear, making last-minute calls home, trading nervous jokes to mask the tension we all felt. I stood in my quarters, reviewing mission details one final time. 6 months in an undisclosed location, leading a specialized tactical unit on an operation crucial enough to warrant direct oversight from General Martinez himself. The responsibility weighed heavily, but not as much as the unexpected weight of my family's newfound awareness. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Dad just hung your Bronze Star photo in his office. Small steps becoming bigger ones. Stay safe." I smiled despite myself. 3 weeks ago, my father couldn't fathom why a general would call me. Now he was proudly displaying evidence of my accomplishments. Progress indeed, though part of me wished it hadn't taken an impending high-risk deployment to make it happen. Lieutenant Chen. Captain Ramirez appeared in my doorway, clipboard in hand. "Final briefing in 5. General wants you front and center." I nodded, slipping my phone into my pocket. "I'll be right there." Ramirez lingered, his expression uncharacteristically hesitant. "Your team's talking about dinner with your family." Of course they were. In close-knit units like ours, personal stories traveled fast, especially ones involving generals making surprise calls during family dinners. "Let them talk," I said, gathering my notes. "It's not classified. They're saying your old man didn't know what you do," Ramirez continued. "That he thought his daughter was just playing soldier while your sister conquered the corporate world." The blunt assessment stung, partly because it wasn't entirely wrong. "My father has updated his understanding of my role." Ramirez snorted. "Better late than never, I guess. Though it's hard to miss a Bronze Star and 3 commendations unless you're deliberately not looking." The observation cut close to home. Dad hadn't been oblivious to my achievements, he'd chosen not to see them, to measure them, to acknowledge them. Only Emma's recent intervention and the sudden reality of my deployment had finally broken through. "Some people need time to adjust their expectations," I said, more diplomatically than I felt. "Well, he'd better adjust fast," Ramirez replied. "Because after this mission, they'll be putting a lot more than a Bronze Star on your chest." The briefing room filled quickly, chairs scraping against the floor as soldiers took their places. General Martinez stood at the front, his weathered face serious as he surveyed the assembled team. When I entered, he nodded slightly, a gesture of respect that didn't go unnoticed by those around me. "Lieutenant Chen," he acknowledged. "Ready to walk us through the approach?" I moved to the front, feeling the eyes of 30 elite soldiers on me. These men and women represented the best in their specialties: intelligence analysts, communications experts, combat medics, tactical specialists. Each had been hand-selected for this mission. Each trusted me to lead them safely through what lay ahead. None of them cared who my sister was or what my father thought of my career. Here, I was judged solely on ability, experience, and judgment. Here, I belonged in a way I never had at my parents' dining table. "The mission has 3 phases, I began, pulling up the digital map on the screen. "Infiltration through these mountain passes, intelligence gathering in these 3 sectors, and extraction through this valley once objectives are met. For the next hour, I detailed the operation, answering questions, addressing concerns, working through contingencies. The plan was mine, developed over months of analysis and planning, refined through countless simulations and scenarios. General Martinez interjected occasionally but mostly allowed me to lead, his presence validating my authority. When we finished, the general stood again. Wheels up at 0600. Lieutenant Chen has command. Trust her judgment, follow her orders, come home alive. Dismissed. As the room cleared, Martinez motioned for me to stay behind. Once we were alone, his professional demeanor softened slightly. "Your father call yet?" he asked. The question surprised me. "Sir?" Martinez smiled faintly. "After I called during your family dinner. Figured he might have questions about his daughter leading one of the most critical operations of the year." I shook my head. "No calls." The general frowned. When my daughter made partner at her law firm, I called every damn person in her office to understand exactly what it meant. Drove her crazy, but I needed to know. The comparison made my chest tight. "Different families have different dynamics, sir." "True enough," he conceded. "Still, man should know what his daughter does. Especially when what she does is exceptional." There was that word again. Exceptional. The same term Dad had finally applied to my work during our last conversation. "He's learning," I said. Slowly. Martinez nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. Because after this operation, he'll have a lot more to learn about. Assuming all goes according to plan." I recognized the implication. Success on this mission would mean advancement, recognition, increased responsibility. The kind of achievement that would be difficult for even my father to minimize or misunderstand. "We won't let you down, sir," I promised. "I know you won't, Chen." He gathered his papers, then paused. "That's why I called during dinner. Wanted to make sure your family understood exactly who they had at their table." The revelation stunned me. The general's call hadn't been coincidental timing. He'd deliberately chosen that moment, aware somehow of my family dynamic, intentionally creating a situation where my father would have to confront the reality of my position. "Thank you, sir," I said finally, unsure what else to add. He nodded. Once, briskly, and left me alone with that knowledge. That night, as final preparations consumed the base, I found myself unexpectedly emotional. Not about the mission, I'd prepared for that, trained for it, visualized every possible scenario. No, what caught me off guard was the shift in my relationship with my family, the tenuous new connections formed just as I was leaving. My phone contained recent text exchanges with both parents, awkward but sincere messages about safety and pride. Mom had sent photos of care packages she was preparing. Dad had asked technical questions about our equipment that revealed hours spent researching military operations. These small gestures wouldn't erase years of feeling invisible beside Emma's spotlight. But they represented effort, attention, a willingness to see me on my terms rather than through the distorted lens of comparison. I thought about all the deployments before this one. The quiet departures, the minimal communication, the return to a family that barely acknowledged my absence. How different it felt this time, to be seen, to be valued, to matter in a way I'd always wanted but couldn't demand. The pre-dawn darkness shrouded the airfield as we boarded the transport plane. Last-minute gear checks, quiet conversations, the familiar routine of soldiers preparing for deployment. I moved among my team, checking in, offering reassurance where needed, feeling the weight of responsibility for each life under my command. My phone vibrated in my pocket, one final message before we moved beyond reliable communication. From Emma, "We're all proud of you. Even Dad, especially Dad. Come home safe. We'll be waiting." I stared at the screen, throat tight with emotion. I couldn't afford to indulge. 6 words in particular echoed in my mind, "Even Dad, especially Dad." Words I'd waited most of my life to hear. "Lieutenant?" Specialist Jackson approached, gesturing toward the plane. "We're ready for you." I nodded, tucking my phone away. "Let's move out." As the transport lifted into the pale morning sky, I felt the strange dual pull of what I was leaving behind and what lay ahead. The family slowly learning to see me. The mission requiring all my focus and skill. The past and future converging in this moment of departure. I closed my eyes, centering myself. Right now, my team needed Lieutenant Chen, tactical specialist and unit commander. The daughter seeking validation would have to wait. The first 2 months of deployment passed in a blur of operational tempo and focused intensity. Our mission unfolded across remote mountain regions, gathering intelligence on terrorist networks planning attacks against Western targets. Each day brought new challenges, split-second decisions, and the constant vigilance required in hostile territory. My team performed brilliantly, adapting to changing conditions, executing complex maneuvers with precision, trusting my judgment even when the situation turned chaotic. We suffered minor injuries but no casualties, completed our primary objectives ahead of schedule, and gathered intelligence that would save countless lives. Through it all, I remained connected to my family in ways I'd never experienced during previous deployments. Emma had set up a group email that allowed me to send updates when possible and receive messages from all of them. Mom wrote about everyday happenings, her garden, neighborhood news, books she was reading. Simple normalcy that anchored me amid the surreal intensity of our operation. Dad's messages evolved over time, growing from brief, awkward inquiries to thoughtful reflections. He'd started reading military history, trying to understand the context of my work. He asked questions about leadership and decision-making that revealed genuine interest in my professional world. In one particularly meaningful exchange, he wrote, "I've been thinking about what you said before you left, that I never asked. About your work. You were right. I didn't ask because I didn't want to acknowledge that your path was different from what I'd imagined for you. I was wrong. Your sister showed me some of the public reports about tactical innovations attributed to unnamed officers. She thinks some are yours. If so, I'm in awe." Reading those words in our remote forward operating base, surrounded by maps and mission plans, I felt something shift inside me, a wound long festering finally exposed to healing air. Then came the ambush that changed everything. We were returning from a reconnaissance mission, moving through a narrow valley that our intelligence had marked as secure. The first rocket-propelled grenade hit our lead vehicle, flipping it onto its side in a deafening explosion. Gunfire erupted from the ridgelines on both sides. "Take cover," I shouted, pulling Specialist Rodriguez behind a boulder as bullets kicked up dust around us. Alvarez, suppressing fire left. "Jackson, call in our position." The next minutes blurred into a cacophony of gunfire, shouted orders, and the controlled chaos of combat. My training took over, mind calculating escape routes, assessing casualties, coordinating counterattacks without conscious thought. 2 soldiers were down, Ramirez with shrapnel wounds, Miller unconscious from the vehicle explosion. The enemy had the high ground and superior numbers. Our extraction point was 3 kilometers away, through territory now proven hostile. "Lieutenant, communications are down," Jackson reported, voice steady despite the bullets ricocheting nearby. "Can't reach base or the extraction team." I processed this information quickly, assessing options that grew more limited by the second. Stay and be overrun. Try to reach the extraction point with wounded soldiers and no guarantee of support. Split the team and risk being picked off separately. We moved together, I decided. Defensive formation, wounded in the center. Rodriguez and Lee, take point. Martinez and Diaz, rear guard. We head for the eastern ridge, use the tree line for cover. No one questioned the order. They moved immediately, each understanding their role, trusting my judgment even as bullets continued to rain down around us. I helped lift Ramirez, who grimaced in pain but remained conscious. "Sorry about this, Lieutenant." "Save it," I told him. "Just focus on staying alive so you can buy me a drink when we get home." He managed a weak smile. "Yes, ma'am." The journey that followed tested everything, our training, our endurance, our unit cohesion. We moved under constant threat. Stopping to treat injuries, navigating difficult terrain, making split-second decisions when enemy forces appeared. Hours stretched into a day, then 2, with minimal rest and dwindling supplies. Through it all, I thought of my team first, mission second, myself last. When Rodriguez twisted his ankle on a steep descent, I carried his pack along with mine. When our water ran low, I made sure others drank before taking my share. When we needed to cross an exposed area under potential observation, I went first. To draw fire if it came. Not from heroism or self-sacrifice, but because that's what leadership meant. What my team needed. What the mission required. On the 3rd day, as we approached what we hoped was friendly territory, Miller's condition worsened. The medic pulled me aside, expression grave. "He needs proper medical care within hours, Lieutenant." The internal bleeding is getting worse. I nodded, calculating distances and options. We're still at least 12 hours from the extraction point at our current pace. He might not have 12 hours, the medic said quietly. The weight of command had never felt heavier. Every option risked lives, Miller's if we continued as one unit, potentially others if we split up or tried something desperate. I closed my eyes briefly, centering myself. What would Dad do in this situation? The thought came unbidden, surprising me. For all our differences, my father's analytical mind and decisive nature had shaped my own approach to leadership more than I'd acknowledged. Jackson, Alvarez, with me, I ordered. We're going ahead with Miller. Fast and light. The rest of you continue to the extraction point with Ramirez. Martinez has command. Martinez looked concerned. Lieutenant, splitting up increases risk. For everyone. Staying together guarantees we lose Miller, I replied. This gives him a chance, and the main unit remains strong enough to defend itself. No one argued further. They understood the calculus, the balance of risk against necessity. Within minutes, we had redistributed essential supplies and were ready to move. If we're not at the extraction point when you arrive, don't wait, I instructed Martinez. Get our people home. He nodded solemnly. Good luck, Lieutenant. What followed was the most grueling 18 hours of my military career. Jackson and Alvarez took turns carrying Miller on a makeshift stretcher while I navigated and provided security. We moved faster than safety would normally allow, taking chances we wouldn't have considered under different circumstances. When Miller's breathing grew labored, we stopped only long enough for the medic to stabilize him before pushing on. When enemy patrols crossed our path, we hid in drainage ditches or dense underbrush, sometimes lying motionless for hours as hostile forces passed mere meters away. My body screamed for rest, for water, for even a moment's respite from the constant vigilance and physical exertion. I ignored it, focusing instead on the next hill, the next kilometer, the next challenge to overcome. Sometime during the second night, as we paused briefly in a sheltered ravine, Alvarez looked at me with exhausted respect. Lieutenant, he said quietly, my sister works for a marketing firm. Always talking about her high-pressure deadlines. And demanding clients. He glanced at Miller's pale face, at the blood-soaked bandages we'd changed twice since leaving the main group. Think I'll tell her about pressure next time I see her. The comment wasn't meant to diminish his sister's work, just to highlight the stark difference in our realities. It reminded me of Emma, of the parallel lives we'd lived, of how impossible it had been for my family to truly understand my world when they had no context for it. Different kinds of pressure, I managed, passing him my canteen. Not better or worse. Just different. He nodded, accepting this generosity. Still. Bet your family sees things differently now, after that general called. I thought about Dad's recent emails, about the photos Emma had sent of my Bronze Star displayed prominently in the family room. Getting there, I said. Slowly. Dawn broke as we crested the final ridge overlooking the extraction point, a small clearing where a helicopter could land. No sign of the rest of our unit yet, which meant we'd managed to outpace them despite carrying Miller. Let's get down there and set up a perimeter, I ordered. Jackson, call in our position if you can get a signal. Alvarez, find cover for Miller and keep monitoring his vitals. We'd just reached the clearing when the distinct sound of helicopter rotors reached us. Relief flooded through me, extraction was coming. We'd made it. Miller would get the medical attention he desperately needed. Then gunfire erupted from the treeline opposite our position. Cover! I shouted, pulling Miller's stretcher behind a fallen tree as bullets splintered bark around us. Jackson, return fire. Alvarez, protect Miller. The ambush had been waiting for us, or for anyone approaching the extraction point. Our arrival had sprung the trap, and now we were pinned down with a critically wounded soldier, minimal ammunition, and an incoming helicopter potentially flying into danger. I keyed my radio, praying it would reach the approaching aircraft. Extraction team, this is Lieutenant Chen. LZ is hot, repeat, LZ is hot. Taking fire from northern treeline. Static answered me. Either they couldn't hear us, or they were maintaining radio silence. Either way, they were flying into an ambush, and we had seconds to change the situation. Jackson, smoke grenades, I ordered. Mark our position and signal danger. He nodded, pulling 2 grenades from his vest. Ready on your mark. Alvarez? I need your rifle. The specialist handed over his weapon without question. Cover me. I'm going to flank their position, draw fire away from the LZ. Both men looked alarmed. Lieutenant, that's suicide, Jackson protested. It's necessary, I corrected. When the helicopter lands, get Miller on board. That's the priority. Before they could argue further, I was moving, staying low, using the uneven ground for cover, circling wide to approach the enemy position from the side. The helicopter's roar grew louder, drowning out the gunfire and my own labored breathing. I reached a position roughly perpendicular to where the ambush had originated. From here, I could see 3 fighters with AK-47s, focused on the clearing, where my team remained pinned down. They hadn't noticed me yet. The helicopter appeared over the ridge, a Black Hawk descending rapidly toward the extraction point. Jackson's smoke grenades popped, releasing bright orange plumes that signaled danger. The aircraft hesitated, hovering higher than planned. I raised Alvarez's rifle, steadied my breathing, and opened fire. The first fighter fell immediately. The other 2 turned toward my position, momentarily confused by the unexpected attack from their flank. That confusion gave Jackson the opening he needed to provide covering fire from his position. The Black Hawk pilot, seeing the situation unfold, made a bold decision. Instead of retreating, the helicopter dropped rapidly into the clearing, rotors whipping the smoke into swirling patterns. I saw Alvarez and Jackson rushing forward with Miller's stretcher, heading for the open door where a crew member provided covering fire. More enemy fighters emerged from the treeline, having heard the commotion. I continued firing, drawing their attention, giving my team precious seconds to load Miller aboard. The helicopter lifted slightly, still waiting, its door gunner unleashing, suppressing fire across the northern perimeter. I began moving laterally, still firing, still presenting a target more tempting than the vulnerable aircraft. Through the chaos, I saw Jackson turn back, scanning for me, clearly reluctant to leave without his commanding officer. Go! I shouted, though there was no way he could hear me over the rotor wash and gunfire. Get Miller out. A bullet struck the tree beside me, spraying splinters across my face. Another tore through my sleeve, leaving a burning graze along my arm. The enemy was zeroing in on my position. I rolled to new cover, checking my ammunition. 3 rounds left. The Black Hawk rose higher, hovering momentarily as Jackson made one last desperate scan of the battlefield. I broke cover long enough to wave them off, a clear signal to leave. The helicopter banked sharply and accelerated away, carrying Miller to safety. Mission accomplished. Now I just had to survive. The world narrowed to immediate survival. 3 rounds left. Multiple hostiles closing in. No extraction. I pressed myself against the earth, controlling my breathing despite the burning pain in my arm. Years of training condensed into this moment, the discipline of staying calm when every instinct screamed for panic. I scanned my surroundings, cataloging potential escape routes, weapons, advantages. The fighters were moving cautiously now, aware I'd taken down one of their own. They called to each other in short, terse phrases, coordinating their approach. I recognized enough words to understand their intent: capture, not kill. Intelligence value over vengeance. That presented both danger and opportunity. A plan formed rapidly in my mind. Not a good plan, but better than waiting to be discovered. I checked my remaining equipment: combat knife, emergency beacon, field dressing, the 3 remaining rounds. Limited options requiring perfect execution. Moving silently, I crept toward a shallow depression 20 meters to my right. The area offered minimal cover but positioned me closer to the dense forest that could provide better concealment. I'd need to cross 10 meters of exposed ground to reach it. I removed my outer tactical vest, placing it carefully against the tree where I'd been hiding. The dark material, arranged properly, might draw fire, a momentary distraction when I needed it most. 1 deep breath. Focus. Move. I broke cover, racing in a low crouch toward the depression as gunfire erupted behind me. The vest had worked, drawing their first volley. I dove into the shallow ditch just as bullets kicked up dirt where I'd been running. No time to rest. I crawled rapidly toward the treeline, using every contour of the earth for concealment. Behind me, confused shouting indicated they'd discovered the ruse. The hunt would intensify now. I reached the forest edge as the first fighter emerged into my previous position. Rising to a crouch, I took careful aim with Alvarez's rifle. 1 shot. 1 fighter down. 2 rounds remaining. The others scattered for cover, momentarily disoriented by fire from an unexpected direction. I used their confusion to push deeper into the forest, moving fast but careful, placing each footstep to minimize sound. Distance was my ally now. Distance and darkness, as evening approached. For hours, I played a deadly game of cat and mouse through unfamiliar terrain. Sometimes I was the hunter, doubling back to eliminate pursuers who grew careless. More often I was hunted, using every trick I'd learned in survival training to mislead, evade, and disappear. Night fell, bringing both blessing and curse. Darkness concealed my movements but made navigation treacherous. I kept moving, guided by stars when visible through the canopy, always pushing toward what I hoped was friendly territory. By dawn, I'd put significant distance between myself and the ambush site. My arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed it, the makeshift bandage stiff with dried blood. Exhaustion clouded my thinking. 36 hours without real sleep, minimal water, no food. The human body has limits, even when pushed by the strongest will. I found a sheltered overhang created by fallen trees and dense undergrowth. Not ideal, but defensible enough for a brief rest. Setting natural alarms, arrangements of twigs and stones that would create noise if disturbed, I allowed myself 15 minutes of closed eyes. Sleep came instantly, dreamless and heavy. The crack of a branch jolted me awake. Light filtered differently through the leaves. I'd slept longer than intended. My hand moved automatically to the rifle beside me, finger finding the trigger. As I scanned for threats, a figure stood 10 meters away, back turned to me, wearing civilian clothes but moving with military precision. Not one of yesterday's fighters, different build, different bearing. Friend or foe remained to be determined. I aimed carefully, conserving my precious remaining rounds. Identify yourself, I called, voice rough from thirst. The figure froze, then slowly raised their hands. Captain Martinez sends his regards, Lieutenant Chen. The voice was American, with the distinctive cadence of special forces. Told us you'd be hard to find. Relief flooded through me, so powerful I nearly lowered my weapon. Nearly. Authentication code, I demanded instead, maintaining discipline despite my desperate hope. Whiskey Echo Sierra Tango. November Echo Whiskey. Yankee Oscar Romeo Kilo. The correct response. Standard protocol required I verify with my own code, but exhaustion and injury made remembering difficult. I searched my foggy mind, finally retrieving the sequence. Delta Echo Lima. Tango Alpha. Charlie Oscar Lima Alpha. The figure turned slowly, revealing a weathered face I recognized, Master Sergeant Reynolds from our sister unit. Damn good. To see you alive, Lieutenant. Half the mountains looking for you. 48 hours later, I lay in a hospital bed at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. The bullet graze had become infected during my forest evasion, requiring proper medical treatment before I could return to duty. Minor compared to what might have happened, but enough to warrant evacuation alongside our other wounded. The room held flowers from my unit, cards from fellow officers, and a collection of official-looking documents I hadn't yet found the energy to read. My body was catching up on the sleep deficit accumulated during the mission and escape, leaving me drifting between deep slumber and foggy wakefulness. A nurse entered, checking monitors and adjusting my four. You have visitors, Lieutenant. Family. They've been waiting since yesterday. Feel up to seeing them? Family? Germany was thousands of miles from home. Who would have? Yes, I said, struggling to sit more upright. Please. The door opened again, and Emma stepped in, followed by Dad. Both looked travel-worn and anxious, their expressions melting into relief when they saw me. Maya, Emma rushed forward, stopping just short of hugging me as she noticed the medical equipment. Thank God. Dad remained by the door, his face working through complex emotions. Lieutenant, he said finally, his voice thick. The formal address struck me as odd until I realized it wasn't formality but respect. He was acknowledging the officer as much as the daughter. How did you know? I asked, bewildered by their presence. Emma sat carefully on the edge of the bed. Your Captain Ramirez called. Said you'd been injured extracting a wounded soldier. Said we should come. Ramirez called you? This made no sense. Military protocol didn't involve notifying family for minor injuries, and Ramirez wouldn't have civilian contact information anyway. Dad stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back in what I recognized as his attempt to control emotion. General. Martinez called me personally. Said my daughter had performed one of the most courageous acts he'd witnessed in 30 years of service. Said I should be here when you woke up. The general again, inserting himself into my family dynamics. First the dinner call, now this. His motives remained unclear, but the results were undeniable, my father standing here, having flown across the world, repeating praise of my service with unmistakable pride. "Where's Mom?" I asked, noticing her absence. "Someone had to stay with the house," Emma explained. "She wanted to come. Sends her love. Made us bring this." She placed a small package on the bedside table, my mother's famous homemade cookies, somehow intact despite the international journey. Dad moved closer, examining the medical equipment with the focused attention he usually reserved for financial reports. "Your commanding officer explained what happened. The ambush. Your decision to split the team. The extraction under fire." I tensed, waiting for criticism. Questioning my judgment had been his default response to my decisions for as long as I could remember. Instead, he met my gaze directly. "You saved them. Your soldier and your team. At extraordinary personal risk." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "It's my job, Dad." "No," he shook his head. "Your job was to complete the mission. Bringing everyone home alive under those circumstances, that's leadership." The word hung between us. Leadership. The quality he'd always attributed to Emma in her corporate rise but never acknowledged in my military career. "I learned from watching you," I said quietly. "How you handled crises at your company. Decisive action. Clear communication. Protecting your people." Dad blinked rapidly, turning away to examine the view from the window. "I never thought. I didn't realize you were paying attention to those lessons." "I was always paying attention," I replied. "Even when you thought I wasn't listening." Emma watched our exchange, eyes bright with unshed tears. "They're recommending you for the Silver Star," she said. "Ramirez told us. For valor under fire." The commendation meant less to me than the fact that my family understood its significance. No more explaining, translating, diminishing. They had stepped into my world rather than expecting me to conform to theirs. "Will you be coming home after this?" Dad asked, his voice carefully neutral. I shook my head. "As soon as I'm cleared, I'll rejoin my unit. We still have mission objectives to complete." Instead of disappointment or argument, he nodded. "Of course. Your team needs you." Simple words, but revolutionary in their acceptance of my priorities, my commitments, my path. We talked for hours as my strength gradually returned. Emma shared updates from home, her new position focusing on sustainable business practices, Mom's volunteer work at the Veterans Center, Dad's retirement plans. Now taking shape. Small domestic details that felt precious from thousands of miles away. Dad asked questions about my role, my unit, my tactical innovations, genuinely curious rather than skeptically comparing. When I explained a particular maneuver we'd developed for mountainous terrain extraction, he listened with the same intensity he'd once reserved for Emma's marketing presentations. "That's why General Martinez called during dinner," I realized aloud. "He knew you didn't understand what I really do." Dad looked embarrassed but didn't deny it. He made that very clear. Said I had an exceptional daughter I wasn't seeing clearly. He hesitated, then added, he was right. The admission couldn't have been easy for him. My father rarely acknowledged mistakes, especially those rooted in his own preconceptions. "Why didn't you tell us?" Emma asked quietly. "About the Bronze Star, the commendations, the special unit. We had to learn it all from outside sources." I considered deflecting but chose honesty instead. "Because I got tired of translating my achievements into terms you might value. Of watching them shrink in the retelling until they seemed ordinary." Dad winced. Emma looked down at her hands. "After a while," I continued, "it seemed easier to keep those worlds separate. To be Lieutenant Chen in one life and just Maya in another. We made that necessary," Dad acknowledged. "I made that necessary. By measuring your path against standards that never applied to it." The statement hung in the air between us. Not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement deeper than any "I'm sorry" could have conveyed. A nurse entered to check my vitals, effectively ending the moment. "Your recovery is progressing well, Lieutenant," she reported. "Doctor says you might be cleared for transport back to your unit within 48 hours. After she left, Emma squeezed my hand. "We'll stay until you're released. General Martinez arranged temporary quarters for us on base." Of course he had. The general's involvement in my family reconciliation was beginning to seem less like coincidence and more like Deliberate intervention. You don't have to stay, I protested weakly, even as I welcomed their presence. Yes, Dad said firmly, we do. Your team isn't the only one that needs you. The next morning, as I was completing physical therapy exercises under the watchful eye of a military therapist, my phone buzzed with an incoming video call. Mom's face appeared on the screen, anxious but smiling. Maya, honey. Emma texted that you're up and moving around. How are you feeling? The genuine concern in her voice touched something deep within me. For years, our conversations had been superficial, careful, avoiding anything that might highlight the different paths her daughters had chosen. Now she leaned toward the camera, eyes scanning what she could see of my hospital room as if trying to assess my condition herself. I'm okay, Mom. Really. Just a minor injury. I'll be back with my unit soon. She nodded, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Your father says they're giving you another medal. He sounded different when he told me. Proud in a way I haven't heard before. We're figuring things out, I said cautiously. It's a process. It shouldn't have taken this, Mom replied, gesturing vaguely to indicate my hospitalization. For us to see you clearly, I mean. The admission surprised me. Mom had always been the family peacekeeper, smoothing over conflicts rather than acknowledging their underlying causes. No, I agreed. It shouldn't have. She was quiet for a moment, then, when you were in high school, you told me once that you wanted to do something that mattered. Something bigger than yourself. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. I didn't understand then what you meant. I think I'm starting to now. The memory surfaced slowly, a career day discussion that had ended with my parents suggesting more practical paths than my interest in military service. Emma had just been accepted to a prestigious business program. The comparison had been implicit but clear. It matters, I said simply. What I do matters. Yes, Mom nodded. General Martinez explained some of it. Not the classified parts. Of course, but enough. He said without people like you, people like us couldn't live the lives we take for granted. She paused. He said you're exceptional, Maya. Those were his exact words. That word again. Exceptional. Once reserved exclusively for Emma's achievements, now applied to mine by multiple sources too authoritative for my parents to dismiss. He seems very invested in our family dynamics, I observed, trying to keep my tone light. Mom smiled slightly. He mentioned that his own daughter faced similar challenges. Said sometimes families need help seeing past their own expectations. She hesitated, then added, he's right, you know. We had such a fixed idea of success that we couldn't recognize it in unfamiliar forms. Before I could respond, a commotion in the hallway drew my attention. Raised voices, hurried footsteps, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on polished floors. I should go, I told Mom. Something's happening. I'll call later. She nodded, blowing a kiss toward the camera before disconnecting. I was halfway to the door when it burst open, revealing Captain Ramirez. His uniform was rumpled, his expression intense. Lieutenant Chen, he said formally, though the urgency in his voice belied the protocol. You're needed. I'm still on medical recovery, I reminded him, gesturing to my bandaged arm. Situation's critical. Miller's intel panned out. We've located the primary target, but the window is closing. General Martinez is requesting you specifically to coordinate the operation. He glanced at the medical equipment. If you're cleared, of course. The implications were clear. This was the culmination of our mission, the high-value target we'd been tracking for months. The opportunity might not come again. Let me talk to the doctor, I said, already reaching for my uniform hanging in the small closet. Events moved quickly after that. Medical clearance granted with reservations. Hasty briefings on transport helicopters. My unit reuniting, faces showing relief and respect as I rejoined them. The missing piece returned to complete the whole. Dad and Emma were waiting when I emerged from the final mission briefing, duffel bags slung over my good shoulder. Both looked concerned but determined not to show it. You're going back, Dad stated rather than asked. I nodded. Critical phase of the operation. They need me. He straightened his shoulders, visibly restraining the urge to object. This was the test, whether his new understanding of my role could withstand the reality of its dangers. When will you return? Emma asked, her voice carefully controlled. When the mission's complete, I replied honestly. Could be days, could be weeks. Dad stepped forward, hesitating only briefly before pulling me into a careful hug, mindful of my injured arm. "Lieutenant Chen," he said formally as he released me, "come back to us." The echo of his words from our pre-deployment dinner wasn't lost on me. But this time, the title wasn't awkward or forced. This time, it carried respect. "I will," I promised, meaning it with every fiber of my being. Emma hugged me next, whispering, "I'm sorry it took us so long to see you." "Better late than never," I replied, squeezing her back. As I walked toward the waiting transport, I glanced back one last time. My father and sister stood side by side, watching me go, not with the confused dismissal of the past, but with understanding, pride, and the particular worry reserved for those we truly see and value. The helicopter lifted into the clear German sky, carrying me back to my unit, my mission, my chosen path. Below, two figures grew smaller but remained visible, watching until we disappeared from view. In that moment, I was neither the overlooked daughter nor the exceptional officer, but somehow completely both, my worlds no longer divided but finally, imperfectly, whole. The mission that followed tested everything: my leadership, my tactical skills, my recently healed body pushed to new limits. For 72 hours, we tracked our target through remote mountain passes, coordinating with satellite intelligence and ground assets in a complex dance of modern warfare. When the operation concluded successfully, General Martinez met our returning team personally, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile as he shook my hand. "Exceptional work, Lieutenant Chen," he said, that word again carrying special weight. "Your family should be proud." "They are, sir," I replied, realizing with quiet certainty that it was true. "They finally are." 6 months after the operation's successful conclusion, I stood in dress uniform outside my parents' house, silver star pinned to my chest alongside the bronze star and other commendations. The formal ceremony had taken place that morning at Fort Bragg, General Martinez presenting the medal before assembled troops and officers, my unit standing at attention as the citation was read. "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty." The words echoed in my mind as I raised my hand to knock on the door that had once felt more like a barrier than an entrance. Before my knuckles could make contact, it swung open to reveal Mom, eyes bright with unshed tears. "You're here," she said simply, pulling me into a careful hug that avoided wrinkling my uniform. "We saw the ceremony on the live stream. So proud, Maya. So very proud." The house behind her had been transformed. Where family photos had once featured primarily Emma's achievements, graduations, awards, professional milestones, now mine stood equally displayed. My commissioning ceremony, deployment photos I'd sent home, a framed newspaper article about the mission that had been partially declassified for public recognition. Dad emerged from his study, his expression softening. When he saw me, "Lieutenant Chen," he said, the military title now carrying warmth rather than distance. "Welcome home." The formal dinner I'd expected had been replaced by a relaxed gathering in the backyard. Close family friends, neighbors, even a few of my former high school teachers mingled under string lights, sipping drinks and sharing stories. A banner hung between two trees: "Congratulations Lieutenant Maya Chen, Silver Star recipient." Emma approached, champagne flutes in hand. "The guest of honor finally arrives," she teased, passing me a glass. "How does it feel to be the family celebrity?" I laughed, still adjusting to this new reality where my accomplishments weren't minimized or misunderstood. "Surreal." Though I noticed they used my military rank on the banner, not Emma's sister, as the identifier. She winced playfully. "Low blow? But fair." She clinked her glass against mine. "To exceptional sisters in different fields." "I'll drink to that," I agreed. As evening settled over the gathering, I found myself beside the grill where Dad was preparing the second round of burgers. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the flames. "Your General Martinez called me yesterday," Dad said finally, flipping a patty with precise timing. "Wanted to make sure we were properly celebrating your return and commendation." I shook my head, smiling. He's not usually this involved in his officers' family lives. Dad adjusted the heat slightly. "I asked him about that, actually." "Why?" "He took such interest in our situation." He glanced at me. "His daughter is Dr. Eliana Martinez, neurosurgeon at Johns Hopkins." The connection clicked into place. And he had the same issues understanding her path? Worse, according to him. Dad chuckled ruefully. Military man expecting his daughter to follow his footsteps, completely blindsided when she chose medicine instead. Took him years to see her success on its own terms. So he recognized the pattern with us, I mused. And decided to intervene. Said he wished someone had done the same for him, Dad confirmed. Saved him years of misunderstanding his own daughter. He turned fully toward me, spatula still in hand. I'm grateful he did, Maya. I was missing so much. The simple acknowledgement meant more than any elaborate apology could have. My father, admitting a blind spot, expressing gratitude for help seeing past it. Better late than never, I offered, echoing words I'd said to Emma months before. He nodded, turning back to the grill. Much better. Later, as guests began to depart, General Martinez himself made a surprise appearance. He arrived without fanfare, declining the center of attention despite curious glances from the remaining attendees. Just stopping by to congratulate Lieutenant Chen in a less formal setting, he explained, accepting the drink Mom insisted on providing. Hope I'm not intruding on family time. Not at all, sir, I assured him, though I wondered at his real purpose. The general rarely made social calls, especially to junior officers' family events. He didn't keep me wondering long. Once we'd moved to a quieter corner of the yard, he got straight to the point. I've been authorized to offer you a new position, Lieutenant. Special Tactical Advisor to Joint Special Operations Command. Based out of the Pentagon, developing the approaches you pioneered during your last deployment for wider implementation. The offer stunned me. Such positions typically went to officers with far more experience, often late in their careers after multiple command tours. That's unexpected, sir. He smiled slightly. Not to those who've worked with you. Your innovation saved lives, Chen. We need that thinking at higher levels. I processed the implications. A Pentagon position. Regular hours. Stability. The chance to influence military doctrine rather than just implement it. What about my unit? I asked. We've built something special there. They'll continue the work, with a new commander trained in your methods. He studied me carefully. This isn't a desk job, Lieutenant. You'll still deploy periodically, still work directly with operators. But your impact could be multiplied tenfold. Before I could respond, he added casually, the position's in Washington. Considerably closer to your family than your current assignment. And there it was, the personal angle I'd suspected lay beneath the professional opportunity. The general was still working to bridge my worlds, even as he advanced legitimate military objectives. I'd need time to consider it, I said. He nodded, unsurprised. Of course. It's a significant change. He handed me an envelope. Full details. Inside. Take a week. Talk it over with your family. As he prepared to leave, he paused beside my father, who had approached to thank him for coming. Their conversation was brief but appeared significant, both men nodding with mutual understanding before the general departed. What was that about? I asked Dad when we were alone. He looked slightly embarrassed. He thanked me for raising an exceptional officer. Said the military was fortunate to have you. Dad's voice caught slightly. I told him the recognition should go in the opposite direction, that I'd failed to see what was evident to him from the beginning. And what did he say to that? Dad smiled ruefully. That parenting and command have more in common than either fathers or generals like to admit. Both involve learning to recognize potential that doesn't match our preconceptions. The wisdom of that observation settled between us, meaningful in its simplicity. He offered me a position at the Pentagon, I said after a moment. Special Tactical Advisor. Developing the approaches we used during the last mission for broader implementation. Dad's eyebrows rose. That sounds significant. It is. Unusual. For someone at my rank and experience level. I hesitated. It would mean moving to Washington. Closer to home, he noted, his tone carefully neutral. Yes. He seemed to choose his next words deliberately. What does Lieutenant Chen want to do? The question, acknowledging both my professional identity and my autonomy in making the decision, represented how far we'd come. I'm not sure yet, I admitted. There are compelling reasons on both sides. Dad nodded, accepting the ambiguity. Without trying to resolve it. Whatever you decide, we'll support it. Actually support it this time, not just say the words while hoping you'll choose differently. The promise felt like solid ground beneath my feet after years of shifting sand. That night, after the guests had gone and the house had quieted, I sat on the back porch with Emma. The evening had cooled, and we shared a blanket as we had as children during family camping trips. "So," she said, breaking our comfortable silence. "Pentagon offer, huh? Dad mentioned it." I nodded. "Big opportunity. Unexpected." "But you're hesitating." "It wasn't a question." I sighed, trying to articulate feelings still forming. "My unit feels like home in a way few places ever have. We understand each other without explanation. Trust each other implicitly. Like family should be," Emma observed quietly. "Yes." The parallel hadn't escaped me. Leaving them feels like abandonment, even for a good reason. Emma considered this. "When I left Harrison and Palmer to join the sustainability consulting firm, I felt the same way. Like I was betraying the team that had invested in me." I turned to look at her. This career change had happened during my deployment, and we hadn't discussed it in depth. "What made you decide to go?" "Realizing I could have greater impact in a role that aligned better with my values," she said. "And understanding that my old team would continue succeeding without me." She bumped my shoulder gently. "Sound familiar?" It did. The Pentagon position offered broader influence, the chance to save more lives by implementing my tactical approaches across multiple units. My current team was exceptional, would continue the work with or without me. "When did you get so wise about career decisions?" I teased. Emma laughed. "Probably around the same time you became a tactical genius. We just specialize in different domains." Her expression grew serious. "The real question isn't about the job itself, though, is it?" She'd always been perceptive about emotional undercurrents. "No," I admitted. "It's about whether I want to be closer to home. Whether that's healthy or necessary after everything that's happened." "You're worried about falling back into old patterns," Emma guessed. "That if you're geographically closer, you'll end up emotionally entangled in the family dynamics again." I nodded, grateful for her understanding. For years, physical distance was my protection. It let me build an identity separate from being Emma's sister or the daughter who chose a different path. "But that identity is secure now," she pointed out. "Dad introduces you as my daughter, the Silver Star recipient, to everyone he meets. Mom has your military photo as her phone background. The validation you wanted has arrived in force." "True," I acknowledged. "But old habits die hard. On both sides." Emma pulled the blanket tighter as a cool breeze swept across the porch. "Maybe the question isn't whether you should be closer to family, but whether you're making the decision based on professional merit or lingering family issues." Her insight cut to the heart of my hesitation. Was I considering declining a career-advancing opportunity simply to maintain emotional distance that might no longer be necessary? "The professional case is strong," I admitted. "It's an exceptional opportunity that could multiply my impact." "Then make the decision on those grounds," Emma advised. "Take the family element out of the equation. If living closer becomes uncomfortable, you can always maintain boundaries. But don't limit your professional growth because of outdated defense mechanisms." I smiled at her. When did my marketing executive sister become so psychologically insightful? "Therapy," she replied bluntly. "Twice monthly since my divorce. Highly recommend it." We laughed together, the sound carrying across the darkened yard. For the first time in years, sitting with my sister felt like a return to our childhood closeness rather than a navigation of complex adult tensions. "I've missed this," I said quietly. "Us. Before everything got complicated." Emma nodded. "Me too. More than I realized until recently." In the morning, I found Dad in his study, reviewing documents with his reading glasses perched low on his nose. He looked up when I knocked on the open door. "Maya. Come in. I was just going through some old family photos." He gestured to several albums spread across his desk. "Found some I thought you might like copies of." I moved closer, curious. The open album showed a series of photos I'd never seen, myself at age 10 in a martial arts uniform, proudly displaying a trophy. Another showed me at 12, intently building an elaborate structure from scavenged materials in the backyard. "I don't remember these being in the family albums," I said, carefully turning pages to reveal more forgotten moments, science fair projects, athletic competitions, early leadership roles in school clubs. Dad looked slightly embarrassed. "They weren't. I kept these separately. My own collection of He hesitated, moments that reminded me of myself at your age. I stared at him, processing the implication. You saw yourself in me? All along? He nodded, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. The focus. The determination. The way you approached problems methodically but creatively. He sighed. But instead of nurturing those similarities, I pushed against them. Tried to redirect you toward paths I understood better. Why? I asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. Dad was quiet for a moment, organizing his thoughts. I think I was afraid, he finally said. My own father never understood or supported my business ambitions. I fought for every step of my career without guidance or encouragement. He looked down at the photos. When I saw those same traits in you, I feared you'd face the same struggles. I wanted to protect you by steering you toward paths with clearer metrics for success. The honesty of his answer touched me deeply. All this time, I'd interpreted his pressure as disapproval, when it had actually stemmed from a misguided attempt at protection. But I didn't need protection, I said gently. I needed support. I know that now, he acknowledged. Too late, perhaps, but I do understand it. I thought about the Pentagon offer, about Emma's advice to make the decision on professional merits rather than family dynamics. It's not too late, I told him. We're both still here. Still learning how to navigate this relationship. He smiled, a genuine expression that softened the usual seriousness of his features. In that case, I have a question for you. A professional one. Go ahead. If you were advising someone else in your position, an officer with your experience and record, would you recommend they take the Pentagon position? The framing cut through my emotional confusion, allowing me to assess the opportunity objectively. Yes, I said after brief consideration. It's an exceptional chance to expand, impact and develop professionally. Dad nodded, seeming unsurprised. Then perhaps Lieutenant Chen should take her own sound advice. The decision crystallized in that moment, clear and certain. I believe she will. 2 weeks later, I stood in my new office at the Pentagon, arranging the few personal items I'd brought to personalize the space. A photo of my unit from the last deployment. A small jade elephant Mom had given me for luck. The compass that had guided me during my forest evasion, now mounted in a simple frame. A knock at the door interrupted my organizing. General Martinez entered without waiting for a response, a habit of senior officers I'd grown accustomed to. Getting settled, Chen? He asked, glancing around the space approvingly. Yes, sir. Ready to begin work. He nodded, then surprised me by closing the door, an unusual step that signaled a private conversation rather than a casual check-in. There's something you should know, he said, his tone more personal than our usual professional interactions. Something about why I've taken particular interest in your career and family situation. I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. 25 years ago, I served with an officer named Michael Chen. He watched my reaction carefully. Your uncle, I believe. The name sent a jolt through me. Uncle Michael, my father's younger brother, who had died in military service before I was born. A subject rarely discussed in our family, marked by such pain that it had become nearly taboo. Yes, I managed. My father's brother. Martinez nodded. Michael was under my command during Operation Desert Storm. Exceptional officer. Innovative. Tactical thinker. Saved my life and several others during an ambush situation very similar to what you faced. I struggled to process this new information. My father never talked about his brother's service. Just that he died overseas. Your father took Michael's death extremely hard, the general said quietly. They were close, despite choosing very different paths. When Michael was killed, something shut down in your father. He buried his grief in work, in measurable achievements, in paths he could control. The revelation illuminated so much about my father's behavior, his resistance to my military career, his insistence on predictable measures of success. The first time I saw your name on a tactical proposal that crossed my desk, I thought it was a coincidence, Martinez continued. Then I saw your file photo. You look remarkably like him, same eyes, same determined expression. He smiled slightly. When I read your tactical assessments, the similarity became unmistakable. Michael had that same blend of analytical precision and creative problem-solving. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? I asked, mind still reeling from the connection. The general's expression was contemplative. Military service involves many complex relationships. I wanted to evaluate you on your own merits, not through the lens of a past connection. And I wanted to be certain before approaching your father about it. Does he know you served with Uncle Michael? He does now, Martinez confirmed. We discussed it during my visit to your family celebration. I believe it helped him understand some things, about his own resistance to your career choice, about the similarities he recognized but couldn't acknowledge. The conversation with my father about the old photos suddenly took on new meaning. His admission of seeing himself in me had perhaps been only part of the truth. Maybe he'd also seen his lost brother, a comparison too painful to articulate. Thank you for telling me, I said finally. It helps me understand many things. Martinez nodded, then shifted back to his more formal demeanor. Your first briefing is at 1400. Joint Chiefs representatives will be present. They're particularly interested in your assessment of mountain extraction protocols. I'll be prepared, sir. He moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Lieutenant. Your uncle would be proud of what you've accomplished. Not just the medals or the commendations, but the lives you've saved through your innovations. That was always what mattered most to him. After he left, I stood motionless in my office, absorbing the implications of this new knowledge. The uncle I'd never known but whose legacy had shaped my family in ways I was only beginning to understand. The father who had resisted my military path not from lack of respect but from deeply buried fear and grief. The general who had recognized in me echoes of a fallen officer he'd respected, creating connections across generations of service. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, settled in at Pentagon HQ? Dad's telling everyone his daughter is reforming military tactical doctrine. Pretty sure he's made business cards with that title. I smiled, typing back, office set up. Already. Feeling very official. Tell Dad my actual title is less impressive but officially classified. Her response came quickly, perfect. That sounds even more impressive to his golf buddies. Another text followed immediately, Mom wants to know if you're free for dinner Sunday. She's inviting your whole team. The invitation represented another step in my family's effort to understand my world, to integrate rather than separate the military and civilian aspects of my life. Tell her yes, I replied. And thanks. I turned to the window, looking out at the Pentagon courtyard below. Service members from all branches moved purposefully across the space, each contributing to the complex mission of national defense in their own way. My new role placed me at an intersection of operational experience and strategic planning, a position to influence approaches that would save lives beyond my own unit's operations. The path that had once seemed to separate me from my family had ultimately created new connections, deeper understanding, unexpected reconciliation. Not because I had changed course to meet their expectations, but because I had remained true to my own calling until they could finally see its value. That evening, I called my father, not to discuss family dynamics or the Pentagon position or even the revelation about Uncle Michael, but to ask his advice on property values in Northern Virginia. A practical question that would have been impossible months earlier, when our conversations had been constrained by unspoken tensions and misunderstandings. The market's competitive, he advised, slipping comfortably into his area of expertise. But I know a good realtor who specializes in military relocations. I'll send you her information. Thanks, Dad. I'd appreciate that. A brief pause, then. Maya? I'm glad you took the position. Not because it brings you closer to home, though that's a nice benefit, but because it recognizes what you've achieved. What you have to offer. That means a lot, I said, hearing the genuine pride in his voice. Especially coming from you. Well, he replied, a smile evident in his tone, I may have been slow to recognize your path, but I always know exceptional when I finally see it. As I ended the call and returned to unpacking my new office, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From the overlooked sister at the dinner table to a Pentagon advisor changing military doctrine. From a family that couldn't see my achievements to one that celebrated them proudly. The title of exceptional had once been reserved exclusively for Emma's accomplishments, applied to her corporate successes while my military achievements remained invisible. Now it belonged to both of us, different fields, different metrics, equal value. That evening, as I drove through Washington, traffic toward my temporary housing, I passed the illuminated monuments that represented American ideals and sacrifice. The general's words about Uncle Michael echoed in my mind, not just the medals or commendations, but the lives saved. That was what had always mattered most. In that moment, I understood something essential about the recognition I'd sought. For so long, it had never really been about the medals or the titles or even hearing my father say he was proud. It had been about being seen completely, my choices, my values, my contributions acknowledged on their own terms rather than measured against a standard that never fit. My phone buzzed with a calendar notification, my first official Pentagon briefing tomorrow, followed by a video call with my former unit, now deployed again under new leadership. Two worlds no longer in conflict but in harmony, each enriching rather than diminishing the other. I saved the notification and continued driving, no longer Lieutenant Chen in one life and just Maya in another, but fully, authentically both. Exceptional not despite my different path, but because of it. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.